Now, witches are very curious people.
Hello and welcome to The Witching Hour, a bi-weekly podcast for the creative horror fan, where we discuss topics related to the horror genre from creepy history, lore media, but most of all, anything creative, all with the hope that we can inspire and motivate you to create your own horror. I'm your host, Sade, and with me I have Ravel.
Hello.
And joining us again, Ophelia.
Hello.
And today, there will be no talk of serial killers. Or
Interestingly enough.
At least we'll try not to. Ophelia has joined us today to talk about Eastern Airlines Flight 401 and the alleged hauntings that followed. I think this will be fun. We haven't talked about anything like haunting or spooky in a while. Not since maybe like our Haunted Dolls episode forever ago. Yeah.
That seems
my God.
so wrong.
Yeah, plugging the McElroy boys. Jesse's got to listen to the Haunted Doll Watch. Anyways.
What?
I'm okay with Haunted Dolls. Send that over to Rayanne.
Hell yeah. Okay, so Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was a scheduled flight from New York, from JFK Airport in New York to Miami. And so, their flight took off at roughly like 9:20 Eastern time.
Oh, what year was this?
1972, sorry. So it was
Okay.
December 29th, 1972.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And 9:20 p.m. Everyone gets on plane takes off, starts heading to Miami. By 11:42 p.m., plane has crashed, many people are dead. And so this is how I tell this tale. So starting with the airline, not the airline, but the crash itself. So what was going on basically that caused this plane to crash was that it was a time before what they would call now, what was it? Cockpit resource management. And so cockpit resource management is this concept in the airline industry where you have certain tasks that they will assign to different people in the cockpit. Like, so you're the second officer and the first officer and the captain and the flight engineers or engineer have particular duties, but are not supposed to basically report back to the pilot as though he is the only person with power on the plane. And this caused two different planes to go down. This old idea, so there's this old idea up until, 1978, where pilots were treated like ship captains, right? So the hierarchy of power that was going on in a cockpit of a commercial airliner was the same hierarchy of power that was used on boats, where basically the captain's rule is the rule, and whatever he tells you to do, you listen and do it. And because of that idea, two planes went down. One of them was in 1978, and it went down in Portland, Oregon, and hit two houses that just happened to be empty. And then this one.
Wow, no, that's lucky. Jeez.
Yeah, that was a bad one. And they were both very similar in what happened. And this one, obviously, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was the first one of the first ones where they really got a taste of, gee, it's a problem if the captain tells everybody to do one thing and everyone is focused on that one thing and the plane falls out of the sky without anybody noticing that it has fallen out of the sky because they're all busy doing other shit. So so what's going on in the cockpit here, right around 11:30 Eastern time at night, so it's dark as fuck. And they're flying over the Florida Everglades. They're doing a hold position where they're circling before they have like an open runway to land on. And so they're circling in the air at an authorized 2,000 feet above the Florida Everglades. And what happens is they try to drop the landing gear, the front landing gear. And in order to know that the front landing gear has dropped, because if it hasn't, you try to land a plane, it'll smash in half. there's an indicator light on the dashboard that would tell them whether or not they'd fallen, like whether or not the front gear has deployed. So that light is not going on. So they've tried to drop the front landing gear, and it doesn't light up that it's deployed. And so now they have to diagnose whether or not they actually deployed and the light's just not turning on, or if there's a problem with the front landing gear deploying. And one of the things about front landing gear is that you can just let it drop out with gravity, like it'll drop out and not snap into place. And they didn't have a chance to like do that like before this crash. So what starts going on while everyone's trying to diagnose, okay, why, like, is the landing gear out? They send the flight engineer to the bottom deck, like the galley where the flight engineer hangs out, which is underneath the pilot's cockpit area, and it's underneath like where people sit in the plane. So it's like down where all of this stuff is stored. And so he's down there because he's trying to just manually check whether or not the wheels are out, because there's like some little hole that they can check so they can verify with their eyes if the landing gear has deployed. And so he's down there checking it out, trying to verify it. And up in the cockpit, they've set the autopilot to continue to do circles at 2,000 miles per hour. Or 2,000 feet, not 2,000 miles per hour. That's absurd. They were doing roughly like, I think it was like 270 some odd miles per hour at this time. So then, as I immediately forget where I was.
They're checking if it's deployed to the people.
Thank you, God. Yeah. So upstairs, up above the galley, is the captain and the first officer. And the captain and the first officer are talking, and I guess so one of them like put it on autopilot, and what they think happened, because this was part of the FAA investigation or the NTSB investigation afterward, what they think happened is that the captain turned slightly around to talk to the flight engineer before he went down into the galley, and he gently tapped on the yoke of the plane, like the steering wheel, and he moved it just ever so slightly forward. And what that did was it locked the plane into an autopilot descent, basically. It was just going to do circles slowly until it had impact with the ground. And so it was a super subtle decline, so none of them were noticing that it was happening. And one of the other reasons people think that they didn't notice that the plane was slowly going down was because it was in the middle of the Everglades, it was the middle of the night, and there were no lights anywhere, like no street lights or like lights from houses. And so they didn't have like an idea of the horizon line, so they wouldn't have noticed in the cockpit that they were slowly descending. But the people in the plane noticed and tried to alert the flight attendants that something weird was going on, and the plane was starting to descend. And
oh my God. Hey guys!
Hey guys! Yeah,
God.
and that message never made it to the captain, I do believe, because they fucking crashed.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh.
You do.
No wonder these ghosts were angry.
Oh, it's so, like, everything that happened after this plane crash is stuff that's just like, that's how you get ghosts. Like,
let's cover the crash first, and then we'll hit up to the ghost stuff.
That's what I figured.
But
yeah.
I know, like you can, like, I think it was like they have like documented like the conversation like of like what was going on in the cockpit, and it's like they finally realize what's happening, and like 10 seconds later they hit crash or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, hey guys, we should do something about. Bam. Okay.
So the plane crashes, and I could be wrong about this, but I remember in one of my videos I was like watching about it with one of the reenactments. It was one of the plane crashes where when the fuselage broke up, a giant fireball just shot straight through the entirety of the passenger section and just blasted everybody with fire. Like, that was cool. So The starting flight had 163 passengers and 13 crew. There were 101 fatalities, including the captains and the flight engineer, and then 75 injuries and 75 survivors. So only 75 people survived out of, like, 176 people. So when they crash, and the fuselage breaks up, they're in the middle of the fucking Florida Everglades, which is the worst place to crash your fucking plane. Not only that, but this was the first ever crash of a wide-body airliner in America. So people were freaked out. So the plane crashes, snaps in half. It's pitch black. It's, like, right after Christmas. It's December 29th. Apparently, nobody had flashlights at this time. It wasn't regulation to carry flashlights on your plane. So when they're in the water, they're in this swamp, and one of the flight attendants, who eventually got, like, a Hero Flight Attendant Award for this, just had to yell out immediately, nobody light a match. Nobody light anything on fire, because there's jet fuel everywhere in the swamp. And this is 1972, where, like, everyone gets on a plane and promptly stuffs 15 cigarettes into their mouth and just lights them all. So, like, lost people.
Oh my god. Yeah, I'm just picturing this like, oh man, we just survived this shit. Oh god, I need my cigarettes. Like,
yeah, and that would have been everyone. And if one person was like, fuck, I need a cig, and just lit that shit up, like, they would have all exploded.
we're all dead.
They would have all died.
We've gone from like a 70% like fatality rate to 100. Just
To 100 in like a second. Yeah.
Just your damn cigarettes. God.
Yeah. So they're in this swamp that's pitch black. Nobody can see anybody. It's full of jet fuel. And then someone reminds them, hey, we should make sure we don't get bitten by a fucking gator.
I was gonna say, you're in the Everglades.
You're in the Everglades. And you want to know...
Did someone die from a crocodile? An alligator?
Yeah. So everyone's freaking out because, like, that. Well, that's the thing, is that the Florida Everglades is the only place, like, in the world that I've read, that crocodiles and alligators coexist, live in the same spot, right? So, like, you're sitting here, pitch dark, can't light anything because you'll explode, and you're covered in burns because, like, a fireball just, like, roasted your ass, and you've got to worry about alligators or crocodiles. Like, it's a fucking, like, mixed bag of what's gonna kill you. And then a bunch of people got, like, deep cuts and shit. So, well,
they're bleeding in the oil and the water.
They're bleeding in the oil and the water. But the thing that was crazy about it was that a bunch of the swamp mud got into people's wounds and stopped the bleeding. So they, like, survived from bleeding out, right? But in turn, then 8 people ended up with gas gangrene.
Yeah.
And the thing with that was that there were not enough hyperbaric chambers in the state of Florida to take all 8 people who got gas gangrene and, like, treat them. So a bunch of these people, like, had to either wait forever or, like, be shipped off to, like, random parts of America. Like, it's just like, oh, cool, you're dying? Let's get on a plane and take you to another hospital. Like,
Florida!
She's like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Is, like, right back on a fucking plane. Like,
I just want to say, like, yeah, the number one mistake people made in this situation was ever getting on a plane to Florida in the first place. Like,
oh my gosh, shut the fuck up. That's what I'm doing next month.
Yeah, but you're going to Disneyland. You're not going to fucking Miami or Disney World. Yeah.
Oh my god, yeah. No, actually, we haven't had a plane crash of a major American airline, like, in over a decade, except for the dude who jacked that plane and then crashed it, but, like, that doesn't count. Because if it's a hijacking of some kind, like, that doesn't get counted in the, like, plane accidents. But, like, yeah, we've got, like, the safest record for commercial, like, air flight in the world. Which is cool, and I remind myself of that every time my terrified ass gets on an airplane. Mm-hmm. So, one of the most fucked up things that happens while everyone's in their swamp sludge of nightmares in the middle of the night, and the flight attendants are trying to keep morale up by getting people to, like, sing Christmas carols. And, like, that was also to try to get people to come pick them up, like, emergency services to find them.
It's the 29th. We're done with Christmas.
I know, but you just, there's New Year's around the corner. You want to make it
It's
to New
technically
Year.
still Christmas until the New Year.
No.
Yeah.
No, that would bug me. Once the
Commercially, yes, it's still Christmas till the
Yeah,
New
but
Year.
26 rolls around, it's over. Don't worry.
I wish. Also, but like part of the reason why there were as many survivors as there were was because they hit the Everglades and that, like, the soft earth it absorbed some of the impact.
Absorbed. Yeah, it's like the swamp absorbed a bunch of the energy of the impact of the plane, and so it's like the true definition of a gift and a curse is fucking landing ripped up in the Florida Everglades, where you're like, yay, my wounds didn't bleed me out to death, but now I've got gas gangrene and I might lose my limbs. Like,
The alligators.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's alligators and fucking crocodiles and shit, and you're just like, cool. Like, somewhere there's probably a goddamn swamp witch who's just, like, cursing you for fun. Like,
Yeah, that's if it was Tallahassee, it would have
Tallahassee Harley.
oh my god. So there was this one guy who was out frog gibbing. Is that a thing that you understand because you're from Florida?
No.
I can go on record and say I have seen Ray Val kill a frog, but on accident.
That was an accident. I felt very bad.
Okay, but did she do the Floridian gender reveal of a baby where they just hold a gator's mouth open and then throw a watermelon in it, and it snaps the watermelon in half, and the watermelon's blue on the inside?
I saw that. Oh, like, this is why I left.
Florida's at it again.
Yeah, it's just like, you know what? There's way too many. Like,
It's a nightmare. It's
people.
a nightmare now.
There's just something in the water down there. It's another world. It feels like.
I imagine so. Yeah, so this guy who is frog giving, which I don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting.
It's like you know when you go fishing with like a little spear.
Oh,
just,
cool!
Stab in
Yeah,
the water. So same thing with frogs.
that is hardcore as fuck. Like, kudos to Florida. So this dude sees the plane crash, and he's like, well, fuck, that's some fucked up shit. And he ran to, like, he took his boat, and he, like, his like, I don't remember what type of boat it was, but, because also he was out there at, like, midnight, so, like, dude, like, lucky all of these survivors, because, like, yeah, how often do you, like, almost die in a horrible plane accident at midnight, and, like, there's just, in the swamp, and there's just, like, some dude at fucking midnight who's just like, oh yeah, I can take a break from the frogs to, like, save some people. Like, what? So
If
he
you're
is
lucky
going
getting frogs.
Yeah, for real. The frogs are just like, "Burn."
His name was like Robert Bud something, right? Marcus?
Yeah. And that guy's, like, really cool because he got recognized by, like, 2 different organizations for his help in taking people out, because he spent 2 days, like, basically helping people, like, get to safety from the plane crash area, and, like, he sustained a bunch of burns and cuts and stuff because he, like, went into the wreckage to, like, save people. So that's badass as hell. Like, yeah. So, and also that guy, like, he tried to save one of the captains, I believe it was, and the captain died of his injuries in this dude's arms.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, so I basically just had to, like, help calm this guy and watch him die. And I'm pretty sure that sticks with you.
Yeah, that'll probably do it.
So, yeah. So we've got gators, crocodiles, swamp, jet fuel, no light, Christmas carols, which could be horrifying in this situation. Maybe there was one Jew who was like, this is the worst day of my life.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And, oh my god, what was it? Oh, yes, the injuries and the gangrene. So that's one of the reasons that my friends and I, when we talk about this plane crash, are like, yep, that's how you get ghosts. That's how you get ghosts. And another part of it, when we talk about the ghost sightings, when I get there, was the significance of it being the first crash of, like, this kind of airliner, like, this wide-body aircraft. And so a lot of the ghost encounters, they experience the ghosts talking about shit like, we're going to make sure that this plane crash never happens again. And it's, like, there's a bunch of reports of them, like, trying to, like, warn people about, like, problems with their aircraft and, like, crazy stuff like that. So
you didn't mention them by name earlier, but there's like 2 ghosts that people seem to see specifically, right?
Yeah, there are 2 ghosts, and it's the ghost of the captain and the ghost of the flight engineer, who are...
I think the captain was Bob Loft.
Bob Loft.
And the engineer was Don Repo?
Yep. Yeah.
And then, like, they both died, and then the one guy that did survive,
there was one guy out of 4 who was, he was just riding, like, back to another place. He was a flight engineer who was riding, like, in with the passengers because he wasn't, like, working on that.
Duty.
He was off duty.
Okay.
Yeah. And he died peacefully in 2004, apparently.
Then the one that died on impact was Stockstill.
Yes. Yeah.
So
and his, there's not a lot of reports of seeing his ghost.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of any. It's just Loft and Repo.
Just
Repo
Loft
especially.
And Repo. Yeah, Repo especially. He's, like, real active.
Well, that makes sense, though, because he was the engineer, and so if there was, like, something wrong with the plane he was haunting, is like, he would know.
Yeah,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Like, you would know. Yeah, so one of the freakiest things about this is the amount of basically what Eastern Airlines ended up doing, because this was a Lockheed, like, 1011 that was one of, like, 10 that they had. And, by the way, the aircraft itself, which was, like, beautiful, if you look at a picture of it before it went down, had been delivered to them 4 months earlier. And so it was a brand new plane. And that's just, like, hideously sad, because planes are supposed to last, like, 30 years. So you just invested.
And then, like, so we know the plane crashed, but, like, we find out that there was nothing wrong with the landing gear, and it was just one faulty $12 light.
Yes, it was the $12 light bulb that just was out, and they didn't get a chance. I guess the flight engineer didn't get a chance to, like, see that the landing gear was out. He probably did right before impact. Yeah, so it was like, it was just the light bulb. And I guess Lockheed did go back and repair, like, fix the problems in their, like, control panel to, like, make it less ambiguous or something, like, real fast, which is impressive, because McDonnell Douglas never took care of any of the broken shit on their planes, and that's why they're not in business anymore.
Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that shit. Like, God, they were bad. Anyway, like, anyways, I don't go, like, too far into planes. So the craziest part about these ghosts that they saw is that there's, like, multiple witnesses to all of these, like, apparitions. Like, so many of them. So there were over 20 encounters with these ghosts, and multiple people experienced them talking or evaporating in front of their eyes. And so, like, that's what's really crazy, is, like, you know, usually if someone's like, oh yeah, I saw a ghost, it's like the one person, and you're, like, taking that one person's word. But, like, when you got, like, entire planes of passengers that, like, saw this guy, like, sitting in a seat, and then he just fucking disappeared, like, and you go hysterical, because of course, and, like, that's insane. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy for more than one person to, like, see it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happened after the plane crashed, because it was one of their new planes and it was one of 10, they salvaged as many parts that they could from the plane crash, and then subsequently put them in other planes. So you can imagine which planes had the most ghost sightings. And those were the planes with the salvaged parts in them. And one of the craziest things in the world was, so not only did the Eastern Airlines CEO just vehemently deny that any of this was true, which is extra great because the vice president of the company himself had an encounter with the pilot ghost, with Loft, like, in a cockpit. So, like, he's like, I saw it for myself. And then meanwhile, like, the president of the company's like, please don't. Like, please shut up. And so eventually, like, after all the sightings and stuff, in an effort to, like, get flight attendants and, like, other flight crew to, like, stop freaking out about the ghost sightings, they went through and they removed all of the salvaged parts. And so, like, that's part of why I'm kind of iffy on the CEO being like, oh yeah, I think this is all garbage. Because a man wrote a book. John G. Fuller wrote a book called The Ghost of Flight 401, which he got sued for, and they lost against him. It was the family of the pilot. And then
I heard that also the airline was thinking of suing him, but they dropped it because they would bring more
publicity to
yeah.
the book.
Oh,
yeah.
boy.
And that was what was really interesting to me, was just the fact that the CEO so vehemently was like, this isn't true, but he's, like, faced with, like, a mountain of evidence, right? Like, from so many people that he works for. So he either, like, kind of was worried that it was true, or, like, just wanted to prove a point in going back and removing all of the pieces from the planes. But, like, a lot of people said that they didn't see the ghosts after that.
Well,
Something
damn.
I do want to point out about the book, the author, John Fuller. A lot of people don't put too much credit into his book because, if you guys remember, he was not new to writing about this kind of stuff. He actually wrote a lot of, like, UFO type books.
Yeah.
The reason I want to point him out is because not too long ago we did an episode on Betty and Barney Hill. And if you guys remember, there was a book written about them called The Interrupted Journey, and this is from the same guy. That was also written by John Fuller. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so the ghost experiences that people had, I'll read off a couple because, like, I want to make sure that I'm not skipping steps, but some of them, like, really were super convincing. And so one of the things about these ghosts that, like, really stood out to me was that every single time someone would describe having seen one, they were like, yeah, they were lifelike. You could basically just, they looked like a human person. And then they would just disappear in front of you, which is, like, terrifying. And that was interesting to me, because, like, usually when I think of ghosts, I think of them being, like, more like an apparition, a little bit see-through or something, right? Like, right? Like, I don't know, you know, like, because, like, a lot of the pictures you see, like, from people who are like, shit, I caught this, like, dead prostitute ghost on video from this old brothel from the 19th century, right? And it's like, yeah, that bitch see-through.
Yeah, that bitch in Tallahassee again.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, like, wild, like, every single person is like, these dudes look like regular humans, and they could talk, like, they would talk to people, and that's, like, what freaked a lot of people out. So, like,
like with, like, the sighting where the vice president saw it, he thought that it was just the pilot for that flight, and
for
then
that
he
flight.
Disappears. Yeah,
because
he
thought
was chatting with him.
He was chatting with him, thought it was the pilot for that flight, and then, like, recognized him as Loft, and, like, got really freaked out, and that was when he vanished. Like, what the fuck? So I'm trying to find, God, there was one that just, like, blew my mind.
Wasn't there one also, like, connected to a fire?
Yes, yeah. So that was one where the flight engineer was, like, down in the galley, I believe, and a woman saw him and, like, got more people to come see him, which is really convincing shit. And he said something about, like, warning them that there would be a fire on that plane and that they needed to be careful of a fire. And then on the last, like, right before the final leg of the journey on that airplane, also that airplane where this happened was one where the galley that they saw him in was salvaged from the crashed plane. So, like, that was literally where he died. Like, they just had attached that to a different plane.
And not realizing that the ghost attached itself to it, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and it was, like, apparently he was sighted on a couple of other planes, but, like, it was mostly that they were sighted on identical airplanes. And given that the fleet was only, like, at this point, probably 9 of these, it's impressive because, like, ghosts, obviously, like, even if they're not tied to that place specifically, they seem to be tied to the what am I trying to say? Like, the flight path, because they would show up a lot on like JFK, New York to Miami flights a lot, and they would show up on the 1011s, the Lockheed 1011s a lot. And then the only one that, like, the only, like, written down testimony that I've found was the one with the fire, and that one was a different model of plane, but they had used the chub. Yeah, here we go. That was on another occasion. There's the written version of this sighting. On another occasion, Faye Merriweather, a flight attendant, saw Repo's face looking out at her from an oven in the galley of the TriStar 318. Understandably alarmed, she fetched 2 colleagues, one of whom was the flight engineer who had been a friend of Repo's and recognized him instantly. All 3 heard Repo warn them to watch out for fire on this plane. The plane later encountered serious engine trouble, and the last leg of its flight was canceled. And then it says, it is interesting to note that the galley of the TriStar 328, or it was the 318, had been salvaged from the wreckage of Flight 401. And so, yeah, the one of the engines caught fire and went out on that plane after he warned them, which is crazy.
Oh my gosh.
And what was the other one that was crazy? Like, the ones where they talk are my favorites. I'm, like, trying to find... I'm such a loser. Like, I should just be able to remember all this shit in my brain. But ADHD's a bitch, y'all. Here, this one. Another incident occurred when one of the L-1011 passenger planes that had been fitted with salvaged parts was due for takeoff. The flight engineer was midway through carrying out the routine pre-flight inspection when Repo appeared to him and said, "You don't need to worry about the pre-flight, I've already done it."
I don't know if I trust a ghost.
Yeah, right? But then, like, there was another sighting of him down in the, like, galley of a plane fixing the oven in the plane. And then, so a flight attendant, like, saw him down there fixing this. And then when the actual flight attendant, or flight engineer for that plane, like, got on the plane, she told him about it. She was like, oh, like, there was already an engineer down there fixing the oven. And this guy's like, I wasn't fixing the oven. I haven't been on this plane. And it sounds like the oven was, like, had been, like, messed with, like, physically. Like, so, what? Like, how can these things, like, interact with stuff and speak? Like, that's probably because of the insanity of the crash itself. And also, I wonder if, like, those two, like, the flight engineer and the captain, like, I wonder if they, like, specifically felt a lot of guilt and a lot of the burden of, like, being the reason why the plane crashed. And so maybe that was, like, part of why they kept appearing, because there is one incident where Repo appeared to a captain and told him, there will never be another crash. We will not let it happen. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I'm like, I guess, like, I don't know. I feel like stuff like that, that's, like, that intense, like, that would lock your soul to this plane, like, of existence for a while. Like, that level of guilt, probably? I don't know. There you go. That's the crazy shit that I got to tell you about.
That makes sense, though. That does make sense.
Right? I think there was like one other. I mean, yeah, there was an incident where a flight attendant talked to the captain in the captain's seat and then left and came back, and the captain was gone. There were passengers that would be sitting next to Repo. Repo seemed like the one who showed up, like, the most, like, and he would just be, like, sitting in his uniform, just, like, quiet and, like, staring ahead. And, like, this flight attendant, so this, like, passenger asked this flight attendant, she's like, hey, like, do you think this guy's all right? Like, he doesn't look all right. And, like, and then he disappeared right in front of her.
Offended, I assume.
What? Offended, yeah. Yeah. And so he disappears right next to her, and she just becomes hysterical and, like, has to, like, leave the flight. And then there was another flight where the flight attendant and the pilot for the flight that was right about to take off go into the cockpit and run into loft in there that was a ghost. And I think that was one of the times where he said something to him. And then, again, vanished right in front of their eyes. And they all freaked out. And so it was like the flight attendant and the captain and I think the first officer, all three, like, witnessed this. And they canceled the flight. They were so shaken. They were like, what the fuck just happened? And they canceled that flight. Like, can you imagine, like, you're, like, getting on a plane somewhere and your captain's like, sorry, ghost infection. Like, you're not going anywhere. Like, what?
I think, too, there's kind of this feeling of, like, is it a violent ghost? Is it a ghost that said, no, it's a ghost that wants to help with it? Fuck it. Let's just fly, you bunch of...
Like, let's just hang out.
Don't be scared. It's just a ghost. Jeez. As long as it's a nice ghost, it's all good.
Yeah, they seemed like great ghosts. Like, even, like, because when they were doing their investigation when the FAA was doing their investigation, which I found the entire FAA, like, document, like, the 50-page document from 1972, it's just scanned and, like, on the internet, because it's 2018 and shit's wild. So I was like, cool, I can literally read, like, all of these documents from, like, 1972. And they did find out, that, in their investigation, that Bob Luft had a brain tumor. Like,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, he had a big brain tumor, and that it could have been interfering with his vision. But then, like, they quickly just eliminated that as being related to the crash, because it wasn't. And they were like, yeah, it could have been, but it literally was just somebody knocked the yoke, and the plane was just like, I guess I'm crashing now, and it just did what it was told.
Oh my god.
Like, yeah. Like,
I'm crashing now.
It's like, I'm crashing now. I love this one. Like,
yeah, that's what a lot of Windows machines do, too. Just yell, I'm crashing now.
I'm crashing now.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so that was, like, the wildest shit. Like, just the interactions that people had. And there was more. So, like, if anyone wants to, like, look it up on their own, like, different sources, like, have, like, more or less, like, sightings detailed. There's some good YouTube videos that, like, talk about the ghost sightings, too. Like, and have little reenactments and shit. It's crazy!
I think what's so just kind of fascinating about that is, so you had basically all these haunted planes, and then it just stopped when, like, they were like, okay.
They took all the parts out, when they took all the haunted fucking parts of a dead plane out, yeah.
Yeah, that's creepy. There's something, because you're like, well, people wouldn't know that. They wouldn't know that the parts were there or not, right? Like,
right, I think they figured it out a little bit into it, but, like, because, like, it was, like, detailed to them, but, like, the first sightings, like, I don't think they knew that it was like, oh, this was the galley that was salvaged from that plane crash, like, and that's why I'm seeing freaking ghosts in it.
Yeah, I think that's just what's so, like, that's what's just so weird about it.
Yeah, it just, like, really stands out, like, yeah, like, and just the fact that there were multiple witnesses to, like, so many of these encounters, to the point where it caused an entire flight crew, to decide to cancel an actual flight. Like,
just like, nah.
Like, these ghosts have, like, real world consequences. Like, people are not fucking around. They're like, we saw it. Sorry. Like, what the fuck?
Look, it still just seems to me, as long as the ghosts are nice.
Yeah, like, why not just leave them alone?
Just, it's fine. Just go. Just do it.
Just give them an extra bag of peanuts and they'll be good.
Yeah. No, they can't afford that, so.
Ghosts don't have ghost currency.
I was like, no, but it's like, look, you're asking for peanuts, that's too much. It's just...
But yeah, that's my tale, if anyone has any comments. Unfortunately, it is a short one, but it is an interesting one.
It is an interesting one. It is just, like, if you're a skeptic with the whole, like, ghost thing, like,
yeah,
maybe that part isn't as interesting to you, but just, like, everything that led up to the crash and just, like, how unfortunate it is, that part is at least way interesting.
Yeah, and, as far as the plane part of that was real interesting was the part where they crashed because everyone was working on other bullshit, because Captain's like, why is this light not turning on? And fucking everybody's like, time to do jack shit but figure out the light situation and not pay attention to us descending. The crash of, let me look up the actual flight, was in Portland, in 1978. And, like, I fucking grew up in Portland and never heard this happening. Brett's dad works for United. I have never heard of this happening. And I was like, I feel robbed. Like, when a plane crashes in my city, I want to know. Like, that's kind of important. And so it was, let's see, it was a United Airlines flight. I think it's actually linked to from this one, because they're like, another plane where people fucked up looking at stuff. Yeah, here we go. It was United Airlines Flight 173. It was a scheduled flight from JFK. Again. Fucking just don't take off from JFK, you're fucked.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was to PDX and, Portland International in Portland with a scheduled stop in Denver. And so on December 28th, 1978, the aircraft flying this route ran out of fuel and crashed in a suburban Portland neighborhood near Northeast 157th Avenue and East Burnside Street.
Oh, wow.
And right? Yeah, I'm like, fucking on Burnside, and like no one told me.
Yeah, you don't expect it to be like a road, It's just like
yeah.
It's like I didn't usually go over to Northeast Portland so much because like I was raised in white suburbia, but like, yeah, maybe that's why they're just like, oh, it just happened where black people live. That's why we didn't tell you.
Oh God, yeah. Why does that sound right?
Yeah. Why does that sound right? So there were 181 passengers on this flight and 8 crew members, and there were only 10 fatalities and 24 injuries.
That probably has something to do with it too.
Yeah, so it wasn't very many people.
It wasn't as okay,
but
the houses they crashed into were empty.
And it did like the fuselage snapped in half, and like I read an interview with a woman once who survived that crash, and she had to like jump out of the tail end of the airplane that had been severed from the front, and it was like a jump that was like 20 feet or 30 feet or something. Ugh. And she was like in pain. So she had to just like jump right out of it and like flag some random dude down to like take her to the hospital, because it was like people like just showed up like driving on the road and were like helping people get to the hospital. And she describes this as also like, this is the worst like shit in the world. Like the 70s, you guys, the 70s were not a real time. That was a fake time. That didn't happen. Like, I don't believe it, because
the 70s never happened.
She's like, oh yeah, like number one, when the captain was like, we've got a problem, so we're gonna have to circle and check it out, which was what happened on this plane, because I guess I should start there. Plane in Portland, United Airlines, Flight 173. They had cockpit resource management problems, and what happened was that the landing gear did not deploy again, but it wasn't the light bulb this time. It was just not falling. And so while they were all trying to diagnose why that hadn't happened again, literally 6 years later from the last time this happened, they're like, everyone's working on that problem, and nobody's looking at the fuel gauge.
Oh God, why? That's kind of sad how just legitimately, like, it just was incompetence.
Yeah, it was straight up incompetence. Oh. And so that plane went down because it ran out of fuel. And you want to know what's real fucked up is that it had refueled in Denver. And so it had, like, twice as much fuel as it needed to get from Denver to PDX. And it blew all of it just circling.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How?
And, like,
how do you do that?
How do you do that? And so, like, this woman is describing, and this is why the 70s were like a fake time that was not real. Like, or it's like, I don't know, it's like a haunted fairy tale where it's just like, everyone's getting murdered, everyone's doing shitty weed, like, everything's crazy. Like, so she's just, you can smoke anywhere you want, like 30 cigarettes in your mouth, nobody gives a fuck. Like, what's cancer? Like, what's liver failure? Nobody knows, and they just do whatever they want. Like,
God, it was, basically, it was great because no one understood how fucked they were going to be in the future.
Yo, right? Like, back when nobody actually used the C word for cancer because they were like, let's not talk about it and then maybe it won't be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, crazy time. So, 78. And this woman in her interview, like, because she's talking about how, like, she needs a Xanax every time she gets on a fucking plane now. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like, I would need, like, a bucket of, like, barbs to get through it. Like, so she says the moment the moment that the captain on that flight was like, we're having a little problem, so we're going to start circling, everyone on the plane lit up a cig.
My god.
She was like, everyone, just immediately, their eyes went wide, and they lit up a cigarette.
Oh god, this might be the last time. Do it now.
Right? Yeah. They're like, and I'm just like, at me next time. So, plane crashes, snaps in half, she jumps out of it, and this guy comes by in, like, a Jeep or some shit, and he's like, hey, you need a ride to, like, the hospital? And so she and, like, a couple of other survivors get in the back of this dude's car, and you want to know what this dude hands them, and they start passing around? A bottle of fucking Jack Daniels. So they're all in this dude's car, cigarettes dangling out of their lips, chugging from a bottle of Jack Daniels on the way to the hospital after getting into, like, a plane crash that destroyed 2 houses. Like, the 70s, man. Like...
That's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it's the most 70s shit I've ever heard of in my life.
Oh, you okay? Here, just start drinking. We'll
just start
get
drinking
there
and
eventually.
smoking.
Yep.
Just go for it. Like, I'm just like, oh my god. But yeah, so both of those airplane crashes, 6 years apart on 2 different airlines, were related to everyone in the cockpit trying to diagnose a problem instead of, like, individuals having, like, authority over the captain or their own individual authority and being given a task in a stressful situation that will actually keep them focused, like, on things that they need to be focusing on, like whether or not they're descending because someone knocked the autopilot, or whether or not, like, your fuel is running out. Like, those are important things. And so, yeah, so then they, like, the FAA, like, radically altered, like, the way that the hierarchy in the cockpit works, so that shit stopped happening. But it's sad that it took 6 years.
Wow.
Yup. Go surreal. Hashtag go surreal. Hashtag believe.
Hashtag believe it.
Oh my god.
Hashtag believe it.
Date bio.
Date bio. She's like, damn, the weep shit started. Gotta turn it off.
Yeah, okay. No, I am curious though, because we used to have our resident skeptic for any, like, haunting episodes was Dead Palette, but he's no longer with us on the show. I think.
Oh my god, I thought he died. Like,
no.
Whoa.
He's on to. Well, I don't know what he's up to now, but he's on to other projects.
Yeah,
But,
other projects at the farm.
What is it? I consider myself kind of. I consider myself mid-skeptic, so, like, I struggle with that. It's a matter of I want to believe, but I don't tend to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, same.
But I'm like, what is it? I'm like Mulder. I want to believe.
More like, I think for me it's more like I want.
No, Mulder
to be
always believes.
real.
You're like Scully.
Scully, okay. That's
Mulder
fine.
believes any bullshit that, like, this way. He's just like, my parents are fucking alien pig babies? Sure.
Oh, God.
I love Mulder. Sorry, Mulder.
Me too. The Witching Hour has come to an end. If you like our show, please take the time to leave us a review on iTunes and tell a friend about us. You can also visit us at creativehorror.com or find us on Twitter at witchhourhorror.
If you're up to some horrifyingly creative things and want to talk about it on our podcast, feel free to reach out to us through email or Twitter. We also have a Patreon where you can get audio extras, mini episodes by pledging $1. Check that out and other rewards at patreon.com/witchhourhorror.
And with that, a quick shout out to our newest Patreon, Sarah Wydra. Thank you so much for your donation and for supporting the show. And also a special thank you to Ophelia for joining us again.
Thank you. And don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter at Sunwells, SUNWELLS. And I'm also on Tumblr as Mercurial Pinko. That link is at my Twitter.
Okay. We can also put it in the show notes if you want.
Excellent.
Thank you to all our listeners for spending your time with us. Whatever your creative passions are, hopefully it's not crashing planes, but get out there and do what makes you happy, and we hope that you'll join us next time for The Witching Hour.
Get out there and what makes you happy. Crash your planes, but not that.
No.
Not that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not, enjoy this, knowing that I'm gonna be on a fucking plane.
Who are you flying with?
My friend. Oh, I'm flying...
I love when people... I'm like, sorry, I'm a plane airplane nerd. I mean the airplane.
I
Like,
realized that after.